Dear friends, I went to see the Fat Controller the other day. I told him that in 1995 it would be 50 years since the first stories about his railway were published.
Good gracious me, he said. We must do something to celebrate that.
And he set to work. Not everything went quite right. For instance, Thomas... but I won't spoil the stories. Happy reading! The author. It was May of 1995, and the engines didn't even know what it meant for the island. But they're about to find out. Our adventure begins with the engines talking at the sheds, not knowing what news they were about to hear.
A Jubilee? I know exactly what that is. It's an engine called Bahamas. I actually met him at Crewe after my nasty accident by the Flying Kipper. He was a nice engine, and we got to talk about our lives non-stop.
Wait a minute, I thought it was the type of party the Humans do. Thomas and I took Boy Scouts from their camping sites one time.
That was a jamboree, Percy, not a jubilee.
Really? Whoops, sorry.
That's all right, little Percy. They do sound pretty similar. Anyway, it was actually a train to pull.
Wait, how is that possible?
You must have got it mixed up with someone else. Flying Scotsman once told me that it used to be a thing in London back in the old days.
That's impossible, because we're not even in London. So how are we supposed to know if your brother is telling the truth or messing with you again?
Not just that, but why would we need it if it's a train? I mean, are you sure we don't have enough express coaches on this island and enough engines to pull them?
To answer your question, James, we do have enough and don't need the Jubilee.
The engines looked at where the voice was coming from. There stood in front of them was Sir Topham Hatt with important news.
50 years ago, the very first railway series book that's based on our island was published. And I think it's the best time to celebrate what Reverend Audrey did for everyone, including us and the fans.
The engines were amazed to hear the news. Thomas couldn't help but blow an exciting whistle, and Gordon thought it was best to ask Sir Topham Hatt an important question.
I better ask him about this before it's too late to do it. Sir, won't there be an important express train for me to pull for the celebration?
I'm sorry, Gordon. I haven't planned out all the details for the celebration yet. And even if there is an important train, I'm afraid I can't spare you to pull it. Remember all the problems you've been having with coal and water whenever it comes to going to the other railway from the past few years?
Oh yeah, that didn't go so well at all. But who's going to pull them?
Well, do you remember the engine Thomas and my grandfather met in England?
Oh yeah, the Royal Highness herself.
Correct. I've asked her if she can do it instead, and she happily said yes, so she'll be the one to take care of it and be at the celebration on time.
Gordon liked the sound of that, but it reminded him that he needs to pull the express in a few minutes. So he immediately popped out of the shed and was going to get ready for his journey. After he started pulling the express, he went as fast as he could, enjoying the breeze going towards him, and the skies were clear blue, just like his coat of paint. But what he didn't know was that a flock of birds were resting in them. They were really close to the railway, and when Gordon got closer to them, the ground started to shake and rattle. The birds were starting to wake up and about to take off when he blew his whistle. When he did, the birds immediately flew out of the trees and turned the sky into a big black cloud above Gordon.
Oh no, this can't be good.
Indeed it wasn't. Some of the birds swooped down towards him, and they weren't making things any easier for him. One of them even swooped down through his face and nearly got hit. But then he felt a bump, and that made the emergency brakes go off. They came to a stop, and all the birds finally disappeared.
What just happened? And why did we stop?
One of the passengers must have pulled the emergency brakes. The guards would tell us why.
But even the guard had no idea why they stopped either.
Perhaps the brake pipes are leaking. I'll go see if that's the case.
He checked all the brake pipes from the coaches all the way down to Gordon, but there weren't any leaks.
This doesn't make any sense. If the pipes aren't leaking and the guard doesn't know the reason why we stopped, then what could be the reason?
Maybe it was the birds.
Why do you think that?
Well, think about it. We stopped at the same exact time as the birds were trying to attack us. Maybe one of them tried to go under me and got stuck. I did feel a bump right as soon as we stopped anyway.
You could be right, Gordon. I'll check underneath you right now. I could have sworn I saw something under your brake pipe earlier.
So he checked under Gordon's brake pipe and finally found the problem.
Aha! There you are! Get over here!
There was a bird under the brake pipe, and he grabbed it and immediately threw it out of there, and the bird flew away.
You were right, Gordon. That bird knocked the seal out of your brake pipe. That was the cause of why we stopped.
Ah, and I thought James getting stung by a bee was weird enough. But I think I've seen everything now.
Everyone laughed, except Gordon. He found it embarrassing and his cheeks were glowing red as a stoplight. Thankfully, he was able to continue his run, but knew that tonight was going to be worse for him. When he was at the sheds that night, the engines gave him a hard time by teasing him. Poor old Gordon! Being stopped by a bird this time. Whatever will happen next to you? It seems like you're never going to have a break from trouble happening. Gordon ignored him and pretended to be asleep. But Thomas did have a point. When will Gordon stop having trouble to himself? It was almost like he was a jinx. But I guess we'll never know the answer to that. Don't you think? On the island of Soldor, there's a few branch lines that belong to some of the engines. One of them belongs to Edward. It begins at the bottom of Gordon's hill and ends at the docks. A lot of times, he sees the mischievous twins, Bill and Ben, there. He makes sure that they behave and not cause any serious trouble, like the time when Thomas helped work for them at the clay works. He's even good friends with both of the diesel engine. They both help each other out and make sure that there's no confusion and delay. But whenever things get too busy for them, the Scottish twins, Donald and Douglas, come and help them. Edward may be old, but he's still a really useful engine, even if the bigger engines think he isn't all the time. But one morning, James was pulling the express and broke down when he was in the middle of the line. When Edward heard the news, he immediately rushed over to pick up the passengers.
Oh, great! The old-fashioned engine is going to continue the job for me. How splendid of you!
We've been through this 100 times already, but I at least won't need any bootlaces to keep the coaches together.
Oh, for Pete's sake, I should have seen that one coming.
Welcome to my world, you new-fashioned and yet hot-headed engine. Just watch this old-fashioned engine do the job for you.
And Edward puffed away, leaving James speechless. Edward was trying to hurry to the station to make up for lost time, but his crew wouldn't let him.
Steady, Edward. He can't be late at the station, so there's no reason to rush things along. Otherwise, you would miss something important or can cause a serious mistake.
Edward knew that his driver was right, but he still wishes that he can speed things along to be on time. But then he started to feel something strange. His joints were rocking left and right.
I'm starting to feel all wobbly, guys.
But it then immediately got worse. Edward's eyes were doing rounds of circles, and his crew was holding on to dear life.
Sweet mother, how can that? What is happening?
Before he could even find the answer, Edward all of a sudden came off the rails and landed right into a field of Farmer McColl's vegetables. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but poor Edward felt like he let everyone down. A few minutes later, Sir Topham was having his lunch when he got a phone call from Farmer McColl.
Hello? What? Edward into your vegetable patch? That must have been such a surprise for you. Is anyone okay? Glad to hear that. Alright, I'll send an engine to fetch Rocky to help clear the mess. No problem. Thank you for telling me, Mr. McCall. Goodbye. This is just what we need before the celebration happens.
Sir Topham had Bulko pick up Rocky and some workmen to clean up the mess. They soon arrived at the farm and immediately put Edward back onto the rails. Then Bulko coupled up to him and set off for the station. After they made it to the station, they left the coaches and Bulko dropped Edward off to the steamworks so he could be fixed. The next day, Sir Topham came to see if he was alright.
I'm okay, sir. Victor said that was my jokes that caused me to recollect to ride so much to land on the field. I think it's because I was going too fast, so I wouldn't be super late with the express. But now I know that I shouldn't have done that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here right now.
I'm glad that you learned your lesson. You're alright. But as a reminder, Edward, that celebration is very close, and we can't have any more accidents while we're getting ready to have it. You understand what I mean?
Yes, sir. Sorry, sir.
That's a good engine. Just be careful next time. Oh, and one more thing.
He pulled out a cabbage from his pocket.
Farmer McCall told me that the next time you or your crew want any vegetables, just ask instead of running into it.
The two laughed about it, and Sir Topham drove off to his office to continue planning for the celebration. A station was built on top of a hill for passengers who live on the hill or hiking to catch a train or bus to ride on. And the hill was very steep and dangerous. Recently, a bunch of rabbits had dug barrels under the tracks, making it even more dangerous. So Sir Topham had put up a speed limit for the engines to go slow and be very careful. Or else, there would have been a serious accident. The engines hated it. Those darn rabbits! I can't believe we have to go slow because of them. This makes things even more difficult.
Steady, Thomas. Just be lucky that Annie and Clarabelle aren't as heavy as Percy's load that he has to take today.
True, but I still don't understand why we have to slow down at the bottom of the hill instead of increasing our speed to get up the hill.
Because if we go faster than what the speed limit is telling us, then the rails below us will collapse.
Well, it's still going to cause trouble for everyone else. Percy and Daisy aren't going to like this. Thomas was right. The other engines hated going slow on the steep hill and knew that Sir Topham needed to do something about it pronto. They understand that he's busy with the celebration, but he should at least put some time into this problem before it gets worse. At last, Sir Topham told the engines that the barrels the rabbits made will be fixed along with the rails. They were very pleased about it. When the day before the repairs started, Thomas was going down the hill after picking up passengers from the station. But then came trouble. Thomas saw the rails being bent, so he tried to stop by putting on his brakes very hard, but it was too late. Ow! Jeez, what the freak! Part of the rail snapped and made a huge dent to it. Thomas wasn't able to get back on them. He was glad that Annie and Clarabelle didn't come off the rails with him, otherwise that would have been even more trouble. So the guard ran to the signalman to call for help. Luckily, Percy was available to help. He was just dropping off some trucks when the station master walked up to him.
Thomas had an accident at the bottom of the hill. Will you go help him back onto the rails, please?
Percy said yes, and puffed his way towards the hill. When he got there, the workman was already at the scene, figuring out what to do and how to do it. Bertie was able to take the passengers, and Toby was able to take Annie and Clarabelle out of the way so they could concentrate on just Thomas.
It's too dangerous to use a crane to put him back, and there's no way we can have Percy pull him out too. Otherwise it would cause more trouble.
Why not try lifting him up with jacks? Then Thomas won't be on the ground, and Percy will be able to pull him back onto the rails.
Well, let's just hope so. How long will it take to do all that?
I think it'll take at least 2 hours, so you better be patient with us.
Oh boy, this is going to be a long afternoon for me. So the workmen immediately started working on getting Thomas back onto the rails. They started with the jacks and carefully lifted him up, and then placed some boards under him, so it can be easier for Percy to put him on the rails. When they were done, they carefully lowered Thomas down with the jacks. They tied a rope to the 2 engines, and the workmen gave them the signal.
Are you ready? Heave!
At last, Thomas was free from the broken tracks. Oh, thank you, Percy. And thank you, everyone, for helping me get back onto the rails. Everyone cheered and Percy blew his whistle. And Percy took Thomas to the steamworks to see if there was any serious damage that needed to be repaired. The next day, the rails were closed for repairs on both the barrels and the broken tracks. The only one who was able to take care of the passengers for the engines was Bertie, but even then he found it very exhausting. He just hopes that the damages can be fixed really soon, as long as it doesn't happen again. There was only a week left till the celebration, and all the engines were excited for it to happen, except Henry. He was feeling very negative and upset about it that he wasn't even sure if it'll work.
It's going to be a disaster. I mean, there's going to be a big crowd, and yet not all of them are going to be able to see who the important visitor is.
Don't be so negative, Henry. You don't even know that yet. The celebration is only a week away.
Well, I'm sure we'll be alright. I've been carrying passengers in me for a long time. So I know what it's like to see crowded people.
I agree. Sir Topham Hatt has all of his plans ready for the celebration. I can tell that it's going to be good.
And I doubt that disaster will happen during the celebration.
The engines agreed, except Henry. He still wasn't sure about it. Edward was fixed just in time. His jolts weren't shaking anymore, and he felt fresh and ready to go. He was at the shunting yards when Sir Topham Hatt walked up towards him.
Ah, Edward. I was wondering if you were here. Are you busy at the moment?
Not really, sir. What do you need me to do?
Well, the celebration is only a few days away, and since you're back from the steamworks, I was wondering if you can lead Duchess to the station like you did with Gordon a long time ago.
I would too, sir. Thank you for choosing me.
You're very welcome, and thank you for volunteering.
I do have one question, though.
What's that?
Who is going to be the special visitor?
Oh, wait and see.
That made Edward even more excited. The day of the celebration finally came. There was a red carpet placed down. Some of the engines already arrived, and there's a big crowd of people who arrived to see the special visitor. Everyone was very excited. Meanwhile, Edward was at the switches, waiting for the royal engine to arrive. He tried very hard not to get super excited. Otherwise, his jolts would probably shake and he'll have an accident again. But at last, Duchess pulled up next to him, and were pleased to see each other again.
Hello, Edward. It's been a while since I last saw you.
Indeed it is. How's things been going for you?
Oh, you know, doing that same exact thing over and over every day, by pulling the royal family to any station they need to get to. But I'm glad to be here on Soda for your 50th anniversary of the Railway Series books, and carrying this important passenger that makes my day even more exciting.
I see. Can I ask who the visitor is?
Sorry, we can't tell you yet. It's a surprise.
Alright, I guess there's still one way to find out. Let's wait for the signal to be changed, and then we can get started.
So they waited for the signal to change so Edward could start guiding her to the station. But nothing happened.
That's funny. We should have started moving right along by now.
Perhaps something happened.
The Duchess was right. The signalman walked towards the two engines.
The signal is jammed. I'm not able to turn it green for you, so you better start without it, I'm afraid.
But what if there's another engine coming towards us?
Don't worry. I already checked and you two are good to go.
Well, all right then. Let's get going.
Edward blew his whistle and he puffed in front of the Duchess, and she got onto his line and followed him from behind. At the station, everyone was waiting for Edward and the royal engine to arrive with the special visitor. I knew it. That silly old Edward couldn't even find his way to here. Maybe he's starting to lose his memory, or... Before Gordon could continue, Edward's whistle could be heard, and then they were in sight. Everyone cheered to see that the two engines were okay, and nothing happened to them. The Duchess pulled up to the station, and the door opened for the visitor to walk out. When the visitor walked out of the coach, everyone couldn't believe their eyes. Who is it, you may ask? It was no other than Prince Charles himself. The people cheered even louder. They weren't expecting him at all.
Welcome, Your Highness. I do apologize about the delay. We had no idea that was about to happen today at such bad timing.
Not to worry, sir. I had a lovely ride coming to this island. I even remember when your grandfather and Thomas came to England when I was just a small boy.
From what he told me, he was covered in coal dust and looked very dirty.
Yep, but he also proved that both he and the engines work very hard and are really useful to the railway.
That's for sure. And I make sure this railway is still on top of things to this day. He would have been very proud to meet you again.
I know he would too. Now, why don't you introduce me to all of the engines? I still remember Thomas, but how about the others?
Sir Topham was very happy to introduce him to the engines. Then Charles thanked the Duchess, then Edward, and then Thomas for being really useful and the creator of the railway. Thomas couldn't help but shout, "3 cheers for the Prince! Pink, pink!" They all whistled. Charles had his ears covered and told Sir Topham had something that he'll never forget.
My mother was right. All of your engines are really useful, and the credit to your family name.
Sir Topham had blushed and thanked His Royal Highness, and the engines all agreed that this was the best way to celebrate the 50th year anniversary since the first book was published.